The crisp air of late November 1992 carried the faint scent of wood smoke and leftover Thanksgiving feasts. The tornado outbreak that had swept through the region just days before was a distant memory, replaced by a strangely calm weekend, 65 degrees and bright. But for 6 teenagers in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the real storm hadn't passed. It lingered in the echoes of their minds, a chilling souvenir from Halloween night at Zayre's. Things had mostly returned to a semblance of normal. Mostly, Jason was still Jason, effortlessly cool, already itching for a new thrill. Mike was still his solid, dependable friend. Lisa and Chris, ever the inseparable duo, still shared their nervous giggles, though perhaps a little less freely now. Sarah, pragmatic as ever, had slipped back into her own social circles, the anxieties of that night tucked away, or so she hoped. But Charles was different. The 14-year-old had become a shadow, more reclusive than usual. He'd spend hours alone in his room, poring over something hidden, his usual youthful energy replaced by a quiet, unsettling focus. Sarah noticed, of course. She worried, but chalked it up to the trauma of Zayre's, figuring he'd bounce back. He hadn't talked much about that night. None of them had, really. But a week before Thanksgiving, unable to hold it in any longer, Charles finally confided in his sister. It turned out in the frantic escape from Zayre's, in the panicked flight from the glowing samples and the overwhelming dread, Charles had grabbed something. A logbook. Not just any logbook, but a journal from a scientist, a Dr. Cowley, who had been conducting experiments right there in the abandoned department store. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The horrors of Zayre's weren't random, they were part of something calculated, something larger. And Dr. Cowley's notes, scribbled in frantic handwriting, pointed to a much older, far more infamous base of operations, the Wellington Hills Sanatorium. The name Wellington Hills Sanatorium resonated with a deep, unsettling hum in the local consciousness. It was a place whispered about, a local ghost story, long before Charles's logbook ever surfaced. Originally opened in the early 1900s, it was built to combat the White Plague, tuberculosis, a grand, hopeful structure intended to breathe life back into the dying. But hope had long since abandoned its stone walls. The sanatorium sat atop a lonely hill, a monolithic shadow against the sky, surrounded by acres of dark, abandoned forest. The only road in was heavily gated, rusted and formidable, guarding secrets no one wanted to disturb. After its usefulness as a sanatorium waned, a darker chapter began. For a brief, horrifying period of 3 years, in the late 1960s, it was converted into a prison for the mentally insane. Stories from that era were even more chilling. Tales of desperate cries and unsettling experiments, until the local community, horrified, finally protested, forcing its permanent shuttering. Now, silence reigned, broken only by the wind through dead trees. Adjacent to the main building, nestled amongst the trees, were 12 to 15 small, desolate houses. These were the former staff quarters, now lightly boarded up, forgotten homes where nurses and doctors once retreated after long shifts. They stood like miniature sentinels, silent witnesses to the sanatorium's grim history. But the most disturbing detail, one that sent shivers down Sarah's spine as Charles read from the logbook, was the tunnel. built to carry steam and supplies between the heating plant at the bottom of the hill and the main building. It was equipped with a cable car to transport items up and down. According to local lore, and now eerily confirmed in Cowley's notes, between the 1920s and 1940s, this very tunnel also served a more macabre purpose, transporting corpses to a waiting ambulance at the bottom of the hill, sparing patients the knowledge that someone had died, keeping death a silent underground secret. The thought of decaying bodies sliding quietly through the darkness, unnoticed, was almost as horrifying as the entity itself. The revelation of Dr. Cowley's continued work at Wellington Hills and the chilling detail about the corpse tunnel solidified their decision. The entity they'd encountered at Zayre's wasn't just a random haunting. It was a consequence, a result of someone's terrifying ambition. If Dr. Cowley had been experimenting with condensed fear, perhaps the sanatorium held the answers, or even a way to stop it. Fear mixed with a dangerous blend of curiosity and grim determination. Friday night, the day after Thanksgiving, the smell of pumpkin pie still faintly clung to Jason's house, but inside the air was thick with a different kind of tension. All 6 of them were there again. Jason, ever the strategist, had spread out a crude map of the sanatorium grounds Charles had drawn from Dr. Cowley's sketches in the logbook. "We go in through the old laundry service entrance on the north side," he muttered, tracing a finger across the worn paper. "Less visible from the road." Mike, despite his lingering unease, was already prepping his gear. A sturdy, long-lasting flashlight, spare batteries. Charles, clutching the actual logbook, now felt a strange pull towards the sanatorium, as if the whispers from Halloween were guiding him, promising answers, or perhaps just more fear. Sarah, seeing the haunted look in her brother's eyes, became even more resolved. This wasn't just an adventure anymore. It was for Charles. Lisa and Chris, though still prone to nervous glances, were caught in the strange gravity of the plan. This time, they were more prepared. Jason held up a bulky Polaroid camera, its flash unit looking comically large in his hand. "Proof," he declared, "and maybe other things." Charles had insisted on bringing his father's old tape recorder, an analog relic with a built-in microphone, hoping to capture the phantom whispers, to prove they weren't just in his head. The clock on the VCR still showed 12 a.m. in eerie green digits. Midnight, the best time for secrets to reveal themselves. The journey to Wellington Hills felt longer, colder than their Halloween trek. The heavily gated road loomed ahead, a formidable barrier. But Jason, with Mike's brute force, found a way. A rusted chain on the side gate, weak enough to snap with enough leverage and adrenaline. They slipped through, the silence of the forest immediately swallowing the faint sounds of the suburban night behind them. The abandoned woods felt ancient, holding its breath. The sanatorium, when it finally emerged from the tree line, was even more imposing than in the stories. A vast, grim sentinel of forgotten suffering. They found a boarded-up window, relatively low to the ground, and after some struggle, managed to pry it open, creating a dark maw into the unknown. Dust, thick and suffocating, billowed out as they squeezed through, one by one, their flashlights cutting trembling paths through the oppressive gloom within. The interior was a labyrinth of echoing corridors, peeling paint, and the stale smell of decay. They moved cautiously, their whispers hushed, each creak and groan of the old building sending jolts of adrenaline through them. Their flashlights danced across overturned gurneys, fallen ceiling tiles, and discarded medical equipment. They eventually found the morgue. A truly chilling room, colder than the rest of the building, with stainless steel tables and long, ominous drawers built into the wall. Despite the palpable dread, Mike, ever the tension breaker, saw an opportunity. "Hey guys, get a load of this," he chuckled nervously. And before anyone could object, he climbed onto one of the stainless steel slabs and, with a morbid grin, slid himself into a cadaver cooler, his head poking out, eyes wide with forced bravado. "Pose for the photo," he called out, his voice echoing eerily. Jason, shaking his head but amused, raised the Polaroid. The flash momentarily obliterated the darkness, leaving a stark, ghostly after-image of Mike's grinning face in the morbid setting. The moment the flash died, a sudden, inexplicable drop in temperature swept through the room, and a whisper, distinct and chilling, seemed to breathe Mike's name right into the frigid air. The incident in the morgue, the chilling drop in temperature and the whispered name, sobered them instantly. The thrill of the adventure curdled into genuine fear. They hurried out, the morgue's chill clinging to them. As they ventured deeper into the main building, the signs of abandonment grew more grotesque. Rooms filled with dead rats in sinks, their tiny skeletal remains scattered amidst cracked porcelain, a testament to the decades of decay. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light from their flashlights, making the very air feel heavy and old. The whispers, which had been faint since they left Jason's lawn, began to swirl around Charles and Sarah again, now occasionally touching the edges of Mike's perception too. "This is wrong, man," Mike mumbled, his bravado completely gone. Charles, however, seemed drawn forward, clutching the logbook tighter. Dr. Cowley mentioned a subterranean access point for his more sensitive patients, Charles murmured, reading from the journal. His voice was low, almost a trance. They discovered it behind a series of locked, reinforced doors, a rusted, heavy hatch on the floor, almost hidden by debris. It led downwards into pure blackness. This was the top entrance to the steam supply tunnel. A tense argument ensued. Lisa and Chris wanted out. Sarah was torn, wanting to protect Charles but also desperate for answers that might free him from the entity's grasp. Jason, his face grim, ultimately made the call. "We split up. Mike and Chris. We'll go down the tunnel. It's the heating plant. Could be a way out the other side. Sarah, Charles, and Lisa, you check the upper floors. Look for more of Cowley's research. Meet back here in 15 minutes. If anyone runs into trouble, yell." The decision felt less like a plan and more like a desperate gamble against the encroaching dread. Jason's group descended into the tunnel, the air immediately heavy and damp. The sounds of their footsteps echoed unnervingly. The cable car sat motionless on its tracks, a decaying reminder of its grim purpose. As they ventured deeper, the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe. Suddenly, from the oppressive darkness ahead, a figure emerged. A spectral woman in an old-timey nurse's outfit. Her face obscured by shadow, drifted silently towards them. She didn't move her lips, but a wave of intensified whispers washed over them, a chorus of suffering that paralyzed them with fear. Mike whimpered, Chris froze, and even Jason, for a terrifying moment, couldn't move. The nurse passed through them, a chilling gust of cold, leaving them gasping, shaken to their core. Sarah's group moved cautiously through the upper floors. The whispers around Charles were almost constant now, a low, maddening hum. They found what looked like an old administrative office, ransacked and decaying. Behind a collapsed bookshelf, Charles noticed a loose floorboard. Prying it open with a loose piece of metal, they found it. More logs and records from Dr. Cowley. These weren't just patient files. They were detailed, chilling accounts of his experiments. Sarah read aloud, her voice trembling. Dr. Cowley wasn't just observing fear, he was attempting to harvest it, to condense it. He documented subjecting patients, those deemed mentally insane during the sanatorium's dark prison phase, to extreme psychological torment. He described the auric residue, or emotional plasma, that fear produced, how it could be collected, stored, and amplified. The notes explicitly described methods to activate and contain this condensed fear, and then, most horrifyingly, how it could be reintroduced to new hosts to feed the growing entity. Zayre's wasn't just a lab, it was a testing ground for the fear he'd cultivated here. The whispers around them surged, as if the entity itself was reacting to its secrets being exposed. Shaken by the nurse, Jason's group stumbled out of the tunnel, covered in dust and a chilling dread. Sarah's group, meanwhile, was reeling from the unspeakable horrors revealed in Dr. Cowley's logs. The realization that the entity wasn't random, but deliberately created and fed, was almost worse than simple ghosts. They reunited in a central courtyard, their faces pale, adrenaline coursing through them. The staff houses, Jason suddenly declared, desperation in his voice. Cowley's notes mentioned he lived nearby. Maybe there's a way out, or something else he hid there. It was a desperate hope, but the whispers were growing so loud now, so oppressive, that staying in the main sanatorium felt impossible. They stumbled towards the cluster of abandoned staff housing. The small houses were eerie, frozen in time. They were lightly boarded up, but easily breached. Inside, they found disturbing remnants of lives abruptly abandoned. A child's toy on a dusty windowsill, a half-finished meal still on a kitchen table, cobwebbed and decayed. These weren't simply forgotten homes. They felt like places where people had fled in terror or vanished without a trace. The whispers here were different too. They felt closer, more personal, as if the entity was following them, playing with them. It was feeding on their escalating fear, growing stronger with every shared gasp, every racing heartbeat. The group was increasingly fractured by the terror. Lisa and Chris were on the verge of breakdown. Mike was white-knuckled, his usual bravado completely gone. Sarah was trying to remain calm for Charles, but even her composure was cracking under the relentless pressure of the whispers that were now touching all of them, a silent, pervasive dread. The entity was no longer just in the sanatorium. It was with them, a parasitic force growing with their every step. They were no longer explorers. They were prey. Panic erupted. They sprinted blindly through the abandoned staff housing, bursting back into the chilling forest, the sanatorium looming behind them like a hungry beast. The whispers pursued them relentlessly, now accompanied by a chilling, low hum that seemed to vibrate in their bones, an invisible hand trying to crush their minds. Charles, already sensitive, felt like his head would explode. Sarah, trying to shield him, felt the entity's overwhelming hunger. They ran towards the main road, the rusted gate their only hope. The forest seemed to twist around them, the trees grasping like hollowed fingers. The air grew impossibly cold, and shadows seemed to detach themselves from the trees, swirling forms that seemed to mimic the orbs and triangles from Zayre's, now faster, more aggressive. This was the entity, fully manifested in their terror. They were barely making it, their breath ragged, their legs burning, the primal scream of their fear filling the night. They just needed to get out, to escape the crushing presence of the entity that Dr. Cowley had unleashed, and which now tasted their fear and demanded more. The terrifying realization that this wasn't over, that it might never be over, began to dawn on them as the gate loomed ahead.